Okay, shalom and welcome everyone to the to our lecture series. We have been those who are new today. We've been discussing the last few weeks life and death, life and afterlife in Judaism. We had a very informative and lively discussions over the last few weeks. And when we came to the topic of cremation, why is cremation forbidden? Why is cremation a big no-no in Judaism? As much as we deal with here in our community with it, and I think every community in America is dealing with this issue. I wanted to reach out to the expert in the field, and Doron Kornbluth out of Israel wrote a book on it, and I heard him speaking for several years, and I'm thrilled to have him here. It was on my to-do list to get him to our community, and I'm thrilled today. Before I will start with Doron, there will be another, we're going to take a break next week for class, but in 2 weeks from today, we'll do our last series, and we have another speaker out of Boca Raton, not as far as Israel. And her name is Rachel Berman. She wrote a book called Dignity Beyond Death. She is part of the Cheva Kadisha Boca Raton, and she was featured on PBS with a segment on Tahara. What is Tahara? And get us a first-hand understanding and tell us more about it. And this will be in 2 weeks from today. It's a free class. You can join again with the same link or just go online, and we'll have Rachel Berman. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Doron. Shalom, Ma'eretz HaKodesh. He asked me to do it early enough so he doesn't have to wake up in the middle of the night, like many other speaking engagement that I see advertised that he's speaking at 8 p.m. in our time. That's like 3 in the morning in Israel. But for our community, where majority of people not working and everyone's retiring here, it works well. So Doron, if you want to do more lectures anytime, you're always welcome. I understand you're also a tour guide in Israel, and we can't wait to go to Israel, hopefully when it opens up. So without further ado, Shalom, Doron.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Hi, everybody. Can I have just a thumbs up if you can hear me clearly? Just give me a thumbs up if you can hear. Great. Okay, looks good. So nice to meet you all. And I'm very glad that we're spending this short time together. Rabbi, thank you for inviting me and for organizing this. And it's not an easy topic, burial and cremation, subjects of death. It's not so comfortable, but they're important. I once heard a story about this older fellow. He's laying in bed and he calls over to his wife, "Honey, please come sit on the bed beside me." Kind of curious, so she comes and sits beside him. And he says, "Honey, remember when we were in our 20s and I broke my leg and you were there with me?" "Yes, honey, I was." "And remember when we were in our 40s and I went bankrupt and you were there with me?" "Yes, honey, I was." "And remember when I was in my 50s and I had my heart attack and you were there with me?" "Yes, honey, I was." So he says, "Well, honey, I have something to tell you." And a tear rolls down her cheek and she leans in and he says, "Honey, you're bad luck." There are some subjects that they just seem like they're bad luck. I mean, it's taboo. We don't want to talk about it, deal with it. Who needs it? Just like some things are better left unsaid, as the saying goes. And that's understandable. Even in Judaism, right? We, what do we say when we have a drink, guys? L'chaim, to life, right? Judaism is about life. We focus on life. And we know there's something after. We sense it, we know it, but we're not too focused on it. Focus on making this world a better place. Focused on adding some godliness and some spirituality and some goodness to my life and those around me, right? So we're very focused on it. So it's kind of funny to talk about these kind of things. But the truth is we have to, because something has changed in only 1 or 2 generations. Something radical has changed in Jewish life, in the Jewish life cycle. When looking around, when we were all kids, cremation was single digits. In America as a whole, it was very rare. And amongst Jews, it was almost unheard of. Today, for America as a whole, over 50% of the American dead, right, are being cremated today. It's the norm for Christians, Jews, the whole American society together. In the USA, it's over 50%. It passed that a few years ago. It's now about 53%, they estimate. And Jews are not that far behind. We're not at 53%, but it's higher than many people realize. The only stat that I know of is by a rabbi named Rabbi Elchanan Zond, who's the head of the Burial Society in New York, kind of the rabbi's rabbi on this subject. And he did an informal survey 10 years ago in New York, and he found that 25% of the requests in Jewish funeral homes were for cremations. Did anybody pick up on all those conditions? That's 10 years ago in New York, the most culturally Jewish part of the country. And that's people who choose a Jewish funeral home rather than people who choose a non-denominational one or no funeral home, whatever. Meaning that nationally, there is no doubt that amongst Jewish Americans today, over a third are being cremated. And in some parts of the country, it's seriously higher. So this is new. It has never been like this in history. Roman historian Tacitus, when he described the Jews, one of the few character traits that he said was, the Jews bury rather than burn the dead. It stood out for thousands of years. We were the burying people. Fads come, fads go, cremation come, but we were always the people who buried until a generation or two ago, when in mainstream America, it's become extremely common and amongst Jews. So the good thing that I love about Zoom, and I'm not sure if you're on Zoom 10 hours a day or this is your first time, but one of the great things about Zoom is that it's actually surprisingly interactive. And you should have on your screen a chat function. For me, it's on the bottom in the middle. And I would like you to tell me, chat to everyone so everybody can see. I would like you to tell me, why are Americans today, not just Jews, Christians, Jews, whatever, why are Americans today choosing cremation more than ever? A generation or two ago, it was single digits. Today, it is the norm. My question is why? This may be things that you've thought about, it may be relatives, maybe things you've seen in the media, movies, just ideas you've heard, discussions. You tell me, put it into the chat box so we can see, why are people today choosing cremation more than ever? So Elizabeth is saying it's less expensive. Elena is saying it's easier, less expensive. Very good. Keep going, guys. When I say everybody's still talking about money, cheaper, more ecological, very good. We're going to talk about these things. Excellent. You guys are getting the good ones. Okay, you've already gotten them, most of the main ones. Social media means just influence of people do what people do, as they say. Very good. Anything else? You've gotten most of the main ones. Don't want to be a burden, don't want to bother family members. Excellent, thank you. Environmental, social media, I see that, great. No one would visit the grave, Larry, very good point. We're going to discuss it. Expensive, very good. Don't want bugs to eat them. Yeah, I can hear that. Less expensive. Okay, I am impressed with your community, Rabbi. You got the top 10 pretty darn quickly. I should have put a stopwatch on it. But what we're going to do, we're going to describe our little time together. We're going to do three things today. First section is I'm going to go through the reasons that you just chose, that you just listed, of why people choose cremation today. We're going to analyze them. We're going to find out together that some of them make some sense. I'm a very honest, straight person. Some of them have some logic to them. Many of them don't. They are based on misinformation. We're going to analyze them honestly. That's the first section. Understand what's accurate and what's not accurate about cremation. Then we're going to flip the script and we're going to discuss burial. And we're going to try and understand a little bit of why Jews for thousands of years have focused on burial. And then we're going to get to questions and comments, and we'll do it through the chat room or open up the mute, whatever. Rabbi, you'll tell me how you want to do it later. So everybody get the idea. First, we're going to focus on why people are choosing cremation. Then we're going to get into burial. Then we'll get to your questions and comments. Okay, so let's go through your reasons. And by the way, I'm speaking about this. I'm getting asked to speak about cremation a lot. It's probably about one Zoom class a week, if not more. And the reasons are always pretty much the same. And what you answered is pretty consistent Sometimes there's small differences in different communities, but these are the main reasons that are cited nationally and internationally. So you hit it right in the head. The first thing you mentioned was money. Let's leave that, okay? Because money is a whole separate issue. Ecology. You may have heard this, environmentalism. I don't know about you, I'm actually very into the environment. I grew up that way and it means a lot to me. And I teach my kids that way. And there are two main environmental critiques of American burials. Critique number one, the amount of land that is used. Critique number two, what gets put in the land. They're connected, but they're different, right? The first one is just, it's a moral argument, really. The idea is that land is for the living. That's the phrase that cremation companies use. Land is for the living. The idea is very simple. We have a limited amount of land. We have a growing population. Why waste the land on bodies that don't need it? Leave it to the birds and the trees and kids and playgrounds, and why waste the land? And by the way, you and I both know that if there really was a choice to make, Judaism itself, what do we say when we drink l'chaim? Life is more important, right? So it's a powerful moral argument. The only thing is, I actually did the math. I'm not the first person to do the math, but I've done it extensively. It's actually Florida, where you guys are, that got me into this subject. I was on a speaking tour. My main sub, I've been teaching in Jewish communities for about 20 years. And for the first 10 years, I had nothing to do with cremation. It wasn't of interest to me. I always thought the subject was kind of morbid and I avoided it. And I give talks. I have a book called Raising Kids to Love Being Jewish. And I give talks to parents and grandparents, how you keep your families Jewish, talk on why be Jewish, talk on Jewish history, on Israel. I give talk on relationships and happiness. There's all different things that I talk about. So I was on a speaking tour actually in Florida about 10, 11 years ago. And I pick up a newspaper, a Jewish newspaper. I don't know which one, I forget the name. And there's an ad from a Jewish funeral home offering Jewish cremations. And I remember being shocked because, I'm like a traditional Jewish boy from Montreal, Canada originally. I didn't know there was such a thing as Jewish cremations. I was like, well, so I started, there's just certain things growing up that like all Jews did, growing up, Montreal's a pretty traditional Jewish city. So, it was like, there's certain things that we know that all Jews do, we know that some people are more observant, some people are less observant. Jews don't pitch Major League Baseball on Yom Kippur. Jews don't pay full retail price, and we don't cremate. When I was growing up, it was just givens, Obviously things have changed. So I was shocked by the article, and I started by the ad, and I started looking into it. I spent about 3 years researching it. The result was my book called Cremation or Burial, A Jewish View. It came out in 2012. And I've been speaking about the subject pretty regularly ever since. Never in those 8 or 9 years have I ever been challenged on the numbers in the book or what I'm going to share with you. I believe that they're straight and they're reliable. You can Google. Get this. I'm not going to bore you with a lot of statistics, but get this. If every American who died, and I'm not speaking to every American, I'm speaking to the Jewish community, which is 1.6 roughly % of the population. But even if every American who died was to be buried, get this stat, it would take 10,000 years to use up 1% of America's landmass. Do you get that? If roughly 3 million Americans die a year, right? And this past year, unfortunately, was higher. But if every American who died, right, 3 million, it would take 10,000 years to use up 1%. True. If you want to be buried in a cemetery in downtown Miami or in mid-Manhattan, you've got a problem. There's no land. But within 30 minutes or 60 minutes of every urban area, there is a ton of land. There is no land problem whatsoever. You do not have to be buried in Wyoming, right there in Florida, and it doesn't have to be in the Everglades. There is a ton of land all over. This is true in North America, in South America, in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, in Australia. There's only 3 places, to my knowledge, that it actually isn't true. Hong Kong, Singapore, and parts of Japan. By the way, there are solutions for each of those problems. Serious environmentalists do not even mention the land issue. We use far more land every year for new Walmarts than we do for burial places. It's just not an issue. It's not true. The more serious environmental critique of burial is not the amount of land. It is what gets put into the land. two main problems. By the way, legitimate problems. Number one, the metal caskets, right? A ton of metal, Golden Gate Bridge after Golden Gate Bridge, right? You have to make the metal, put it into the ground, right? It lasts for hundreds of years, rusting. It's really bad for Mother Earth. Number two, embalming. So I don't like talking about gross stuff, but you did realize this was a talk on burial and cremation. So we're going to have to broach a few of these subjects briefly. For those who don't know, embalming is when they remove the liquids, basically the blood from the body, replace it with preservatives so the body will last longer. It still decomposes, it just takes longer, right? Formaldehyde is the main chemical that is used today. To this day, it's still the main chemical that is used. And it's terrible for the environment. There's no doubt that environmentalists are the amount of toxic chemicals, gallons and gallons every year. Does anybody notice anything about these two environmental problems with modern American burial? Metal caskets and embalming. Anybody know? The rabbi's smiling. Ronnie, putting up your hand. I can tell in your eyes that you know what it is. They're not Jewish. We don't do either. Judaism insists on simple wood caskets. Pine is the wood of choice, but simple wood caskets. By the way, here in Israel, we don't even bury in a casket. The body is carried in a casket to the grave, but when it's put into the grave, it's just in burial shrouds, right? But simple wood, modest, no metal. And there's actually a few holes put on the bottom of the casket so that the decomposition, natural earth to earth, ashes to ashes, there's a connection, right? We don't try and put in metal and delay and whatever. And furthermore, embalming is considered a desecration of the body. By the way, if you don't know why, and if you're a bit masochistic, take a look on YouTube and watch an embalming. And within 10 seconds, you'll know exactly why we don't do it. It's not complicated, okay? It's kind of gross. It's a desecration of the body. So the point is that, yes, modern American burials have some real problems with the environment, but not Jewish burials. Jewish burials are and has always been considered a model of environmentalism. Environmentalists are not in favor of cremation. It is simply not true. They are in favor of what's called green burial. Cremation itself, right, is highly problematic in terms of the environment. Just think about it. We're all getting rid of our cars and we're getting Teslas and hybrids and electric cars, and suddenly you're using a ton of fossil fuels to burn up all these bodies. Terrible for the environment. And cremation releases toxic chemicals into the air. If you're my age or older, and if you have a filling, you probably have mercury in your teeth. Younger people, they're not doing that anymore. But for our generation and older, they were doing that. Terrible, releasing mercury into the air. Many municipalities around the world have a rule that you're not allowed to have a crematory beside a school. Ask yourself why. About 2 weeks ago, you can Google this. It was in the news, the LA Times, that the county of Los Angeles relaxed its rules on crematorium. Why? Because unfortunately, there's such a backlog of bodies and there's more burning going on than ever before. And it's bad for pollution. It was breaking the pollution laws, right? That's how bad cremation is. Normally they have a limit of how much they're allowed. They relax the limits because there's just too many bodies that are being cremated. And so that's how cremation is not good for the environment. Environmentalists are not in favor of cremation. Uses electricity, burns toxic chemicals. Green burial is the answer. Green burial, main two character traits. No metal caskets, no embalming. There's other things about how you design the cemetery, things like that. Some are better, some are worse. But overall, Jewish burial is a model of environmentalism. Okay, that's the first thing. Next thing, some of you mentioned that reasons why people today are choosing cremation, that maybe people won't be visiting the grave. People are less traditional, so they don't visit graves as much. And people move, meaning, there's many retirees in Florida, if you hadn't noticed. And so, people say, well, where am I going to be buried? Here, the only people I know here in Florida are in the retirement village, and they're all dead or going to die soon anyway, right? I'm going to be buried back in New York. I haven't lived there for 20 years. Who do I know there? Out in California, where the kids are, they're not going to visit the grave. And how long are they going to be out there in California anyway? So people say, with some justification, People say, well, no one's going to visit my grave anyway. So why bother having one? Better to just cremate, get the thing done with, sprinkle, scatter the ashes. So I want to test your Jewish knowledge. Rabbi, you are not allowed to answer this question, okay? But you better know the answer, but you're not allowed to answer. There are two famous burials in the Bible, in the Torah. One towards the beginning, one at the very end. The one at the beginning is when Abraham buries Sarah in the cave of Machpelah in the city of Hebron, visited to this day. And at the end, God buries Moses, right? So you mentioned before, Rabbi, that I'm a tour guide. Pre-COVID, I'm a tour guide. I take families all around Israel. I go to Poland as well. So true or false, ladies and gentlemen? Thumbs up for true, thumbs down for false. True or false? My favorite location to take tourists in Israel is the grave of Moses, the Moses. True or false? I see a bunch of falses. Nobody's saying true. Everybody, okay, Robin is saying true. That we had, it's a Jewish crowd. We have to have some disagreement. I mean, come on, you can't all agree. So the truth
Doron, I'll pay you extra if you take me there.
So the rabbi knows the secret. So Robin, I'm sorry to inform you, it's false. In fact, it was a trick question. It's not my favorite place to bring tourists in Israel for two reasons. Number one, Moses isn't buried in Israel. He never made it into the promised land. Remember Martin Luther King Jr., right? I have gone up the mountain, I've seen the promised land. He's taking the imagery from the end of Deuteronomy, at the end of the Bible, that Moses is looking into. He's on the east bank of the Jordan River. Basically, he's in the country of Jordan today. The second reason, even more important for us, is that we don't know where he's buried. God hid the place of his burial. The simple explanation is that he was such a great prophet that God knew it would become a place of idol worship. And better that we don't know where it is so people don't start thinking of him as a god. So let me ask you a question. Has anyone ever visited the grave of Moses? Not in 3,300 years. No one has ever visited his grave. And yet, although we know archaeologically there was plenty of cremation then, that was the norm at the time, God did not choose cremation. He chose burial. Because we moderns, we put two things together in our minds. And it makes sense at first when you don't think about it too much. Having a grave and visiting a grave. And we conclude if no one's going to visit the grave, either because I don't know anybody in this state, or because they're not traditional or whatever, then why bother having one? But the story of Moses at the end of the Bible, the greatest prophet of all, shows that these two things are not connected. It's nice to visit graves. I actually like it. I'm not a weirdo. I don't go every day, don't worry. But when I do, I actually connect to it. You don't have to. There's no Jewish obligation to go visit graves. If you connect to it, beautiful. And by the way, it's sometimes surprising that you have like one grandkid that gets into it a little bit, Jewish genealogy, history, tradition, and it means something to them. But even if no one's going to visit, having a grave is independently important, whether it's visited or not. The grave of Moses proves that to us. We're going to find out more why. We're moving quickly because I want to leave time for questions and comments. Going back into a couple of you mentioned social media, meaning that why are people cremating today just because it's the thing to do? So I hope it's okay, Rabbi, that I'm kind of dressed informally. I'm not wearing a tie. I used to wear a tie when I'm speaking, but now I'm like, I'm in my living room. It just doesn't work. I actually only wear a tie now once a week on Friday nights. I don't know about you in Florida, but here in Israel, the shuls, the synagogues are basically closed or very limited in numbers. So I haven't been in synagogue. I literally have not been inside of a synagogue in a year. We pray outside, upstairs in the parking lot. And so on Friday nights, I wear a tie. It's the only time of the week that I wear a tie. And my kids are always bothering me about my ties. My ties are too wide. My ties are too thin. My ties are too wide. My ties are too thin. And guys, I have 5 teenagers. 5 teenagers. Give me some love, people. I need it. Come on, 5 teenagers. You know what it is. And but I always tell them that I'm not changing my tie. Why? Because and I know that in a few years, this tie will be back in and it'll go from wide to thin to wide to thin. Fads are fads. But just because other people are cremating so I'm going to cremate. That's not the way you make decisions about anything important in life, right? You do a little research, you go to a lecture, read a book, you talk to your rabbi, right? So the fact that it's more common today for a lot of reasons, that doesn't mean that it's necessarily a good decision. Let's just go through a few more of the reasons that you mentioned. Don't want to bother family members. Cremation seems, quick and easy. So I'll tell you, the biggest surprise I had in my 3 years of research when I was researching my book was that I had always assumed that cremation was something like a microwave oven, meaning you put the body in, you press the button, 60 seconds, 90 seconds, the ashes come out, maybe in an urn, and you're done with. Ladies and gents, forgive me, but that's not how things work. If you are thin, a thin person, right? Anybody here remember what it was like to be thin before COVID? So if you're a thin person, a cremation takes 60 to 90 minutes. If you're like me and COVID has done a number on you, and that's what I call it, COVID-19, right? The 19 extra pounds we've all gained sitting around. So if you're overweight, like much of the Western society, it's 2 to 3 hours. For an obese person, which by the way, the stats are, unfortunately, I'm heading in that direction. I better start exercising again. We just came out of lockdown here, so hopefully I'll get moving again. But if your BMI is 30 or above, all right, it's 3 to 4 hours for a cremation. It's not so quick. And during that time, forgive me, the body is not calm and placid and spiritual. The muscles are contracting and expanding. The brain is sizzling. It is a disgusting thing. It's now I'm not going to sit here and tell you that that burial is pleasant, right? I mentioned being eaten by bugs. I hear it, okay? I remember high school labs. It's not, decomposition is not pleasant, okay? What I am telling you is that they're both kind of gross. And get this, one, burial is the natural way of every living thing. A plant grows, blossoms, goes back to planet Earth. An animal is born, runs around the forest, goes back to planet Earth. Cremation is a man-made artificial act. They're both kind of gross. In terms of being a burden, but you know what? You're right, that if you leave it till the end and you don't plan anything, then it's a bit of a pain in the neck to your kids. But if you pre-plan it, and I even suggest prepaying it, by the way, I don't get a commission. I'm just telling you how to do it. It's really not that much of a burden. And as Thomas Lynch, he's an undertaker in Michigan, non-Jewish, he said very beautifully, he said, if I can't be burdened with the burial of my parents, what can I be burdened with? Like, it's really such a big deal. When you go through the reasons that people choose cremation today, one by one, ecological reasons, mobility reasons, all these, visiting the cemetery, they all fall away. I think we've addressed them all. If not, when we get the questions and comments, we can go back there. But they're simply not true, except one. There is one reason that people choose cremation today, and only one reason, by the way, one reason that actually is true. And I'm a very straight shooter, and I'm being very honest. Everybody realize what it is? Money. Ronnie said it right away. In most cases, cremation is far cheaper than burial. It doesn't have to be, by the way. There are cremations that are quite expensive, and you can do burials quite cheaply. By the way, COVID has taught us in many parts of the world that you can do a graveside. Or Rabbi, I know that you have a special cemetery you work with, and you can be like, there's ways of getting funeral costs and burial costs way, way down. Still very respectful and everything. But at the end of the day, for most people in most cases, not all, burial's more expensive, right? Sometimes it's a few $1,000s difference. So now our question is going to be, why is it worth the extra money? Meaning we've finished the first section. The reasons that people choose cremation, they're not true, except money. It generally is more expensive to bury. So gentlemen, when you proposed to your beloved and you gave her a ring, I hope that you did not get the ring from the bottom of a Cracker Jack box, right? You actually got a proper ring, right? Some things are worth the extra money. And I'm going to make a case that this is one of them, that this is worth the extra money. And the question is, why? So, like this. We've now discussed cremation, why the reasons are not there. And we're now going to focus on burial. Why is it worth the extra money when it does cost extra money? I'm going to move quickly because I want to leave time for questions and comments. Let's start. First reason. In World War II, in the Kovno ghetto, Rabbi Ephraim Oshry is in the ghetto, and a Nazi SS officer barges in, blonde hair, blue eyes, slams the door behind him. Rabbi Oshry thinks it's his last moments on planet Earth. And to his great surprise, the Nazi starts speaking in perfect Yiddish. Rabbi, I'm a Jew. I have fake papers. I look the part. This is how I'm surviving. But I'm a very sick man. I only have a few weeks to live. And I know what they're going to do to me. They're going to bury me in a Nazi cemetery with a Nazi cross over my body, surrounded by Nazis forever. Rabbi, I could do this and fake it for a few months to survive, but forever, I can't. Can I be cremated to avoid that fate? And the rabbi gently and lovingly said, my dear child, no, you can't. What they do to us against our will, right, we have no control over. God will take care of that. But as a Jew, we are commanded to do whatever we can to for ourselves and for others, proper Jewish burial. In normal times, he said, that means the Jewish prayers, the tahara that you're going to be learning about in a couple weeks, the cleansing, the preparation of the body. That means the little bit of earth from the land of Israel that is put into the grave everywhere around the world. But even in crazy, terrible times like the Holocaust, the rabbi said, right? It means to be buried. And it is even better to be buried in a Nazi cemetery with a Nazi cross than to be cremated. This, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, I'm speaking now, is not a guilt trip. Believe it or not, Judaism is not into guilt. I know that's a surprise to many of us because we joke about Jewish guilt all the time. But speaking honestly, if you cremated a loved one, whether it's their decision or your decision, or if you've decided to cremate whatever, don't feel that we're not into beating ourselves up. You did what you thought was right at the time. Judaism is into life, into the future, right? Make a donation to the Chabad of Venice. He didn't ask me to say that, but it deserves it, in the person's memory, and move on, right? We're not here about to beat ourselves up about the past. We're trying to make good decisions for the future. The first reason, the rabbi from the Kovno ghetto reason, this is a core part of who we are as Jews, a surprisingly important part of our religion. If I was creating a religion, I don't think that I would really care much about what happened to dead bodies. But our tradition does. Abraham buried Sarah, Abraham is buried, Jacob is buried, Rachel is buried. I mean, the Torah spends an enormous amount of time on this subject. It's in all over the Talmud, it's in the early authorities, the Code of Jewish Law, Maimonides. This is a huge mitzvah. It's not just a nice thing that Jews do, bagels and lox. No, this is a huge, huge mitzvah, a surprisingly important one. When a new Jewish community is being formed, what are its priorities? Well, the first things you're supposed to do when you build a new Jewish community: a school for kids, a mikveh, a ritual bath, and a burial society to make sure Jews have proper burial. It's one of the three first things you're supposed to do. Do you know that you might recognize the name? Many of you probably will recognize the name, Gilad Shalit. Everybody recognize that name? He was the poor Israeli soldier that was kidnapped by Hamas in Gaza. He was in the jail there, dungeon there for 5 years. We made an exchange for him. 2,000 terrorists were released in order to get him back safe and sound. We're very, very happy that he's out and he's safe and sound. He just got married, actually, from what I was told, which was very sweet. But it was a very controversial decision. 10% of those terrorists have been re-arrested for new terrorist crimes since then, right? It's not a simple thing. Most people have heard the story. What you might not know is that the state of Israel, on several occasions, has traded hundreds of live terrorists in order to get back dead bodies. People we knew were dead. By the way, that's not a simple calculation to make, and you may be for or against it. I'm just pointing out it's so ingrained in who we are as Jews that we're willing to do that to provide proper Jewish burial. So again, we're saying, why is it worth the extra few $1,000 or whatever it is? First reason, It's who we are as Jews. It's a core part of who we are. This is not a minor part of our tradition. This is a major thing, surprisingly important. Number two, anybody here ever been to a Jewish burial, a Jewish funeral, and seen the mourners, M-O-U-R-N, right? The mourners, or maybe you've experienced yourself, God forbid, tearing kriya, where the clothing is torn. You've heard that thing, right? The close mourners tear kriya. By the way, tearing kriya is like a double phrase. Kriya means like tearing a tear. That's what it means. So I don't know what's happening in your community, but I know that in some communities in recent years, there's this new thing where the funeral home will like give a little ribbon, and the mourners, they'll just like cut the ribbon, right? It's a sweet, nice idea. I don't want to be critical. I'll just point out that's not the tradition of thousands of years. The whole tradition of 1,000 years is, it's not that somebody gives me a ribbon. It's that it's my clothing. I am ripping it. I am torn. It is not okay. As a person sits there sitting Shiva, life is not just going on. I'm not just going back to work the next day. Imagine the following scenario. When a person dies, Mother Earth tears Kriya. A hole is opened up in the fabric of the earth. It is not okay. It is not normal. We feel the pain. It hurts. But then slowly, lovingly, the body is put into the ground. The family, friends, community, they lovingly put the earth back on top of the body. The healing begins. But there's always a scar. There's always a gravestone, because the person is never forgotten. It's a beautiful image, I think. The earth itself tears Kriya. If you think about it, there's a real deep lesson there. The lesson is that when the time comes, hopefully not for a long time, we need to experience this. The modern world is in a certain kind of a death denial. I'll give you two examples of it. At first, they sound opposite, but they're actually very similar. Some people, they don't like dealing with death. So let's get it over with quickly. That's cremation. Speed up the process. That is, don't do 7 days of Shiva. Do 3 days, do 1 day, do an afternoon. Just get it over with. They call this the toilet assumption, right? Something's unpleasant. I just want to flush, get rid of it as fast as possible. Other people are uncomfortable with death. They don't like it. So they fight it. That's a metal casket, right? The body still decomposes, but it'll take longer. That's embalming, right? That's mausoleums above ground, right? The body's still going to decompose, but I'm fighting it. These two attitudes, speeding it up, slowing it down, at their core, they're really the same idea. I'm not accepting it. Judaism says 6 days a week, you build, you improve the world, improve yourself, right? 7th day, sit back. I'm not in charge over here. The day of rest. Our whole life, we're building. At the end, my last act on planet Earth, sit back. I'm not going to speed it up, cremation. I'm not going to slow it down, by metal casket or embalming or mausoleums. I'm going to let it be. Healthy societies need the proper experience. Denying death is not healthy for anyone. Another idea. Imagine the following scenario. God forbid, husband dies, woman comes home from the cemetery, takes off her black dress, puts on a red party dress, and that very night goes out to the clubs looking for a new guy. Sound normal to you? Right? I mean, certainly not, right? So when you have a partner of many years, you don't just abandon and forget about that partner and move on, right? You're attached to that partner. So in Judaism, the body and the soul are partners. They're not enemies. Raise your hand if you have ever visited a Jewish monastery or convent. Trick question again, guys. There are none. Why aren't there any? What, you think Catholics are stupid? They're not stupid. What do they think? It's a very simple philosophy. I happen to disagree with it. We disagree with it as Jews, but we have to understand it. Their philosophy is, right? If you want to be spiritual, you want to reach up to God, then you have to deny the physical, right? The body is bad. Priests are celibate, nuns are celibate, right? In the Eastern religions, they sleep on hard stone floors, don't have good food, right? Because physicality is bad. You want to be spiritual, fight the physical. The body is essentially bad. What did you say about physicality? God is a good God that created a good physical world. We have to manage it correctly. Rider on the horse, not horse on the rider, can't be hedonistic or selfish. But on Shabbat, you have good food, right? To have a beautiful, intimate life with your spouse is a wonderful, beautiful thing, right? I mean, it done correct, it's a beautiful thing. The body and soul are partners. And you treat your partner with respect. Get this. When you were 8 years old and your pet dog died, I can virtually guarantee that your mother did not say, okay, honey, you bring the dog over, I'll fire up the barbecue. She didn't say that, right? What'd you do with the pet dog? You buried it. Because get this, we bury treasure, we burn garbage. Get that? We bury treasure, we bury things we love, we burn garbage. The soul and the body are connected. The body is holy. Everybody remember Hurricane Katrina, where there was those shuls in Louisiana that the synagogues were flooded and some of the Torah scrolls were destroyed beyond repair? What do we do with those Torah scrolls? We bury them, right? Holiest objects we have, right? If you can fix a Torah scroll, wonderful. But if not, you have to bury it. So a human being is holier than Torah scroll. Whether you are a man or a woman, old or young, healthy or not so healthy, more observant or less observant, right? A human being is even holier than Torah scroll. Just like we bury a Torah scroll, we bury a person. Final idea. And with this, we'll get into questions and comments. Final idea. I don't know where I got this from, but I have the image in my mind of of a monologue of an elderly Jewish guy that he says to his kids, I want you to listen to me for a minute. I'm going to be serious for a minute. He says, I may not have been the best Jew on planet Earth. I didn't have a strong Jewish education, didn't really do much. Looking back, maybe I do things differently, maybe not, I don't know. But there's one thing I know. I was born a Jew. I'm proud to be a Jew. And when I die, I want to be buried as Jews have been buried for thousands of years. I want the rabbi to say the prayers. I want the proper tahara, the preparation of the body. I want the little bit of earth from the land of Israel. I want the Hebrew date. I want the Kaddish. I want everything. Because my last statement on planet Earth, I want it to be, I may not have been a perfect Jew, but I'm a proud Jew. So I don't know about you, but to me, that's very touching. Let's summarize, and then we'll get into questions and comments. We started out with the reasons why more people today of all types are choosing cremation. We went through them, and they're actually not true, not better for the environment, doesn't solve mobility problems. We went through them. There's only one real reason why cremation has a leg to stand on, so to speak, and that it's cheaper in most cases. So why is it worth the extra money? And of course, if it's a financial issue, you talk to the rabbi and they'll deal with it. Okay, there's no Jew to my knowledge has ever been cremated because of money. That's not the right. So, but why is it worth the extra money? Because most people are going to pay a few extra $1,000. By the way, I'm very much into, as I mentioned, you pre-plan it, you pre-play it, so that's very clear in your will, in your living will, in your wallet. When my time comes, hopefully not for a long time, here's the name of the Chabad rabbi. Here's his email. Here's his WhatsApp, here's his cell phone, here's his address. All decisions go through him. You just follow his lead, right? No issues and you prepay it, right? So that way the kids are not fighting about it. There's no questions. It's taken care of. I've made my decision. This is the end of my life. It's all done, right? You have it in writing. I can't tell you how many people that I know of that they always assumed that their kids would know what they wanted, but it wasn't in writing. And the kids are faced with an extra $4,000, and the kids just they go the cheap way, right? Even what are you talking about? Like, Leo, this is like my final thing, right? Get it in writing, get it clear. And we talked about why. Why is it worth the extra money? There's dozens of reasons I don't have time to share with you. I shared some of the ones that at least touch me. This is a core part of our religion. Healthy societies need the presence of the dead. Denying it, speeding it up, slowing it down, denying it is not healthy. Tearing kriya, right? The earth tears kriya. Cemeteries are, it's a healthy part of life that we should have. And to try and deny it is not healthy. The body and the soul are partners, right? That the soul does not run away from its body. We respect the body, the soul respects its partner. You bury treasure, you burn the garbage. Our tradition says that the soul stays with its body during Shiva, going back and forth between the body, its body, and the Shiva house. Slowly the soul ascends to heaven. And finally, this idea of the elderly Jewish gentleman saying, listen, I may not have been the perfect Jew, but I'm a proud Jew. And that's my final statement on planet Earth. Okay, guys, thank you very much for listening and for participating. I've gone on, I think, long enough for now. Can we have open up for questions and comments? Rabbi, how do you want to do this?
If you want to ask a question, you can either put it in the chat and I'll read it, or you can unmute yourself. Not that. So I'm gonna share a few questions that came already in the chat. Sandy asked earlier, don't they bury in Florida with metal because of the water level float on the ground? I can answer that question, Sandy.
Please.
We in Florida we have an issue with the water table, but in Florida we don't bury with metal. We bury we put the casket in a vault, in a cement vault. However, we leave a gap on the bottom of the vault so the casket gets in contact with the earth. The other question I have, somebody asked, what do you tell, I guess what do you tell a family member or friend that already made that decision? What do you tell them to change their mind? I guess show them the lecture, or Doron, do you have a...
It's not an easy subject to raise. What I suggest is that, but you're doing the person a favor. In other words, if you're a friend, if you're a relative, this is something that most people haven't really thought about, don't really have the basic information. So, you're trying to help them, and that's good. So what I suggest is you say, listen, I don't want to butt into your life or tell you what to do, but you can use me as an excuse. Just say, I just heard this lecture, or you can, forgive me for the plug, you can give them a copy of the book, Cremation or Burial, A Jewish View. Right. And I'm going to give you some resources after. I'll put into the chat of some website and things and say, this is an important thing. Maybe you should think about it, and get some information. We can talk about it. And you just try and get them, if they reject it and they don't want to hear anymore, okay, you've done your job. You're not going to start World War III. But,
I have a quick question.
But to raise it is helpful.
I have a quick question. When I was in Israel, I went to a funeral. The body was put in a cloth and literally dropped into a grave. Is that the procedure normally in Israel?
No, I mean, casket? Definitely. The procedure is that it's carried in a casket to the grave, and then it is laid down in the grave itself without the caskets. It's right. Only in the shrouds. If it was dropped there, I haven't seen that myself.
So slid in.
I've been to hundreds of funerals here in Israel, unfortunately. I've never seen it being manhandled.
They don't bury in caskets.
Correct. Yeah. Ashes to ashes.
Can you speak a little about that? What would be the significance of that as opposed to our need for putting people in caskets?
Well, just if I could.
Jewish question?
Let me try and do my best to answer. Flip the question and say, why do you need a casket? Who says you need a casket? Where does that come from? Throughout history, they didn't use caskets for thousands of years. A casket is only used basically because in the Civil War, there were all of these Union soldiers that were killed in the South, and they had to ship them back to their to their parents in the North. So they started embalming, which existed in, Pharaoh was embalmed in a certain way, right? That's the antecedents of it. But it became a major practice in the US in the Civil War because they wanted to keep the bodies for a couple of weeks on the trains going back north so the parents could see the bodies. There was that much death. No other country on planet Earth embalmed like the United States, and it's because of the Civil War. Same thing with caskets, I am told, that the use of caskets expanded extraordinarily over history because that they were being moved. But you don't really need a casket. There's no particular reason to have one. So here they do it, again, if the municipality requires it, or the funeral home requires it, fine, there's no problem. As long as it's simple wood and it's biodegradable, we have no problem with it. But you don't need it. So as long as the body is treated respectfully and it's in a talit sometimes and burial shrouds, then it's perfectly fine. Does that answer your
Yeah.
question?
Can you do that in a Jewish cemetery in America? Not use a casket, or is it
I
required?
think most places require a casket.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think most places require a casket. You
I-
can always ask.
I'd prefer the soft way.
I'm with you. Any other questions or comments?
Somebody here in the crowd asked, what happens to the soul if the body was cremated?
Okay. It's a hard one to answer. I will share with you what I know. First thing is, how do I know? How do I know what happens to the soul, right? So, well, the truth is that we actually do know something. Think back to when your kids were young. Any normal parent, you don't just give birth to a kid and then like let them figure things out on their own, right? You actually teach them what you know to try and have a good, productive, honest life, right? So God is a parent, and God doesn't leave us without instructions, doesn't just let us be born and not teach us anything. That's why we have Judaism. That's why we have, and we're taught certain things in our tradition, even about the world to come. Not a lot. At least I don't fully understand it. I don't think anybody does, except maybe you, Rabbi. But one of the things we're taught is that for a soul to transition properly to the next world, it has to go through certain steps. We think of the Jewish burial and mourning, M-O-U-R-N. We think of Jewish burial and mourning customs for the mourners. 7 days of Shiva, 30 days until the Shloshim, the memorial, a year or 11 months of Kaddish, all the prayers. And that's true. They are for the mourners. And people have written books and PhDs about how cathartic and how beautiful the Jewish traditions are, right? But the truth is, though that system is also for the soul, that the soul is escorted. Just think of it this way. The soul has been in its body and it's going back upstairs, so to speak, right? That's not an easy transition to make. And you have to go step by step. And that's why there's a week of Shiva and 30 days and the year of Kaddish. And slowly it's escorted back upstairs. So our tradition says that when the soul and the body split, when a person dies, what the soul wants more than anything is proper Jewish burial. It is literally begging for it, to help it pass on. Now, this does not count for the Holocaust, or in my opinion, if you have a Jew born on a Pacific island, never knew they were Jewish and chose cremation because that was the only thing, like they have absolutely no responsibility whatsoever, right? God will take care of them. But for the rest of us, we're supposed to try and choose make the best choices we can make. And the soul needs to go through proper burial in order to transition to the new world that it's entering. Right? We're not big into talking about the afterlife, but there is one. Baby in the womb doesn't know that it's about to come into a new world. Well, the comparison is made that the body in the grave is in a womb and is going into a new world, right? So the soul needs its body to be properly buried in order to transition to the new world, to that afterworld. By the way, I always say that, people call it the afterlife. You've heard that phrase, like the afterlife. Do Jews believe in the afterlife? I actually want to write a book someday that calling it, no, it's not the afterlife. We're in the pre-life. You get the nuance? Afterlife implies that what we have here is the main thing. There's something after. No, actually, that's the main thing. We're just in a pre-life over here. So it's kind of an interesting idea. Okay, any more questions, comments? If not, that's okay.
You have to unmute if you want to ask a question.
Oh, sorry.
There was a follow-up question on Sandy on the cement vault. The cement vault doesn't disintegrate, doesn't have to disintegrate. It's not where the person is buried. As I mentioned earlier, Sandy, we leave a gap in the bottom of the cement vault, so the body is able to disintegrate in the ground beneath. That is a requirement in Florida, although I did hear now that there are people who care about the environment, because this cement vault does have metal in it. They're now the first Jewish cemetery in Florida in Boca Raton that's going completely green, where they have now the ability to bear without that cement vault. So if you care about the environment on that extent, you can go across the state.
I'm putting into the chat right now some resources for you, for those who want further information. Obviously, the number one resource is your wonderful rabbi. That's why he's there. If you want anything Jewish, obviously the biggest Jewish website online, Chabad.org, has everything. On this subject, it even has a little bit of me. There's a video of me and a few articles and things like that. But it's got a lot of other people on the same subject and on every other subject. If you're looking for something on this particular subject, there's a website that I suggest. It uses my information, some other people's information, peacefulreturn.org. Peacefulreturn.org is as a short 4-minute video on the subject. It's got me speaking. It's got a bunch of different articles by different people. It's actually pretty well done. And for those who are interested in the book, for more information or to share with others, my book is called Cremation or Burial, A Jewish View. And it is available at mosaicpress.com. And that's just some resources for you. Any other final questions, comments, anything anybody wants to share?
Yes,
Nina,
Nina.
go for it.
Yes, I have a question. I know that Christians believe that when they pass away, they will see again their family, their children, whatever. What is our belief as in the soul? Will we get to see our loved ones? Or...
The short answer is yes. The Christians got it from us, right? Again, it's funny. Like, there's a lot of ideas that like people think that they're the Christian ideas, and it turns out, Christianity is a relatively new religion, right? It's 2,000 years old. We were around for over a millennium. Well, even much more than that, actually, before Christianity. So, I remember growing up thinking that I'll share one idea, guys, just to pique your interest and to end on a strange and spooky note. I didn't actually mention today in our hour together, whatever it was, the number one reason why our tradition encourages burial. The rabbi's been thinking to himself, who is this guy? He didn't even mention the number one reason that Talmud mentions. Anybody know what I'm talking about? The resurrection of the dead coming back to life. Why didn't I mention it? Very simple. It sounds weird. I mean, come on. You believe in this stuff? When I think of resurrection, you know what? I'm not proud of this, but now that we're friends, I'll share it with you. When I think of the dead coming back to life, you know what I immediately intuitively think of? 1980 or 81, whatever it is, Michael Jackson, first great music video, Thriller. Remember, it's like zombie stuff, right? This is Judaism. Like we're too smart for that stuff. So the explanation is there's a lot of beautiful Jewish ideas that because we've been introduced to them through the prism of Hollywood or a different religion, they seem like weird or off or something. And they are. But if you get back to the core idea, they're very beautiful, right? Same thing with resurrection of the dead. Anybody remember Dolly, the sheep that was cloned? Remember that sheep that was cloned?
Yeah.
40 years ago. Cloning is way past that today. There are Hollywood celebrities that have cloned their animals today. Cloning is a moral issue today, not a scientific one. DNA, Voltaire once said, it's no more of a miracle to be born twice than born once, right? Very profound statements. They can take, if you've been to Masada, if you've been here to Egypt, been to Masada, Yigal Yadin, the famous archaeologist, found 2,000-year-old date pits. They extracted the DNA and there's palm trees growing up the road, right? So the idea of the physical coming back, it's not a crazy idea. It's not even science fiction. It's science, right? And it is part of Judaism that our bodies are important. Right? You bury the garbage, right? You bury the treasure, you burn garbage, right? Body and soul are connected. And so, you hear some of these ideas, Nina, like the one that you talked about, seeing people, or sometimes people talk about dead coming back to life, and they seem strange unless you kind of hear them from the source. When no, the idea is like, death is a physical thing. It's not a spiritual thing. The person's soul lives on forever. So of course you're going to see your relatives. Because
But interesting thing
never
is,
die. What?
the
Mira, you
interesting
have questions? Yeah, go ahead, Mira.
the interesting things is now that connection with our relatives, like my grandfather, He passed away 6 months before I was born. His name was Moshe, and I was named after him. I never seen him. He came in dream to me in America before something horrible happened. There was a fire in our building, and we could have died in this fire, my husband, me, my children. But he came to the synagogue, Kazan synagogue, and I saw him on a distance because Rebbetzin Kazan told me, here is your grandfather. He's praying very hard. This was my dream. I never seen him in my life, but there is connection between dead and life, and it will never go away from us. We
So Mir,
feel
I want to tell you, that I'm in my personal approach. Everybody has their own approaches to God and spirituality and religion. You know, in my personal approach, I've always been a very big rationalist. I'm a thinking, person. I'm into statistics and arguments and things. I've never been like the spiritual spooky type. But I want to tell you, as I get older, there's just too many things that we can't explain. There's just too much out there. Like to think that physical is that all there is. I'll tell you one brief story. Okay, very, very quick. I know we have to go, but I fancy myself a speaker. I do a lot of teaching, but I'm very not musical. I have like terrible singing, musical voice, and I hate. Forgive me, Rabbi. Don't be offended. I hate leading the prayers in synagogue. It's just because it's got to be some melody or whatever, and I just can't. I'm tone deaf, whatever it is, and I avoid it at all costs, right? And I pray 3 times a day, but I avoid leading the prayers at all costs. There's only one time a year really that I do, twice a year really. It's the yard site, the anniversary of the death of my grandparents. So one day I'm in this town in the south somewhere, and I show up on a speaking tour, and I show up in the shul, and the rabbi's gone, the cantor's sick, there's nobody there, and the older gentleman there, they kind of impose on me to lead the prayers, which I really don't want to do, but there's nobody else there can do it. So I go back to my hotel room after, and I realize, oh my gosh, I forgot my grandmother's yard site. And today is my grandmother's yard site. And I just davened, led the prayers, accidentally, so to speak, on my grandmother's yard site. Guys, this is a true story that happened to me out of 365 days of the year. So the idea that like we understand what's going on, and that, I'm not saying to get into tarot cards, they're garbage, and the newspaper horoscopes, they're garbage. But the idea that there is a soul, and there is spirituality, and there's something there, and there's something after, 100%. I think we all sense it in some way.
soul lives forever.
Any final comments, questions? Rabbi, anything you want to add?
Uh,
Rabbi, you don't want me to ask that question that I put on the chat, and we don't have to go there. If you want.
I'm sorry, I didn't look. Hold on.
I can repeat it.
I don't see it. Oh, about a soul going back and forth by after death.
Yes.
It's the Zohar, the prime Kabbalistic work authored by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who is buried near Tzfas, up in the Kever Rashbi in Israel. He's the one that the day of death is Lag BaOmer, right? Which is the big parades that Chabad does all over the world, and in light of it. So he wrote a book called the Zohar, which is the prime Kabbalistic Jewish mystical text. And in the Zohar, it talks about the soul going back and forth.
Yeah, Leona, we didn't do the class on the afterlife, or as Rabbi Doron says, but we will. I plan, God willing, to do a class on the concept of the soul, of afterlife and resurrection in sources of our Torah, and to believe in it. And we can elaborate on that. I want to thank Doron, and I want to finish, Doron. You said about the yurts of your grandmother, something probably many can relate to. Something in my experience, what is the number one time people go to shul once a year? On Yom Kippur and for Yizkor. And Yizkor, the shuls get packed, and we have many times people who just come for Yizkor, and right after Yizkor, I call it the annual exodus of the shul. And you have atheists that come to shul, and sometimes you ask them, why are you coming to shul? They say, what do you mean? It's Yom Kippur. It's Yizkor. I got to be there. And the Rebbe said this. The Rebbe said the reason why people are pulled to go into shul for Yizkor is because their loved ones up in heaven are pulling them into shul. They don't even understand. They don't even know why. But there's a certain pull. They got to be in shul. Thank you, Doron. That was very informative.
Thanks, everybody.
We will have another
Thank you.
class in 2 weeks on the topic of Tahara with Rachel Berman. And thank you, everyone. I wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom and stay safe.
Thank you.